Who are we? Well, I'm Bernie. I'm a retired senior executive from the trucking transportation industry, former classmate of my partner in crime, Dick. And we hope to provide a senior perspective to people of all ages on the current events of the day, and also some anecdotal stuff and some humor, I hope.
Okay, I'm Dick. I'm 74. I'm a retired military officer. After leaving the military, I taught high school for 15 years, basically psychology, and I'm not happy the way the world is going. Hey, Bernie, what's on your mind today?
Well, Dick, I think I'll start with you.
Okay,
I'm predisposed to talking politics, but I want to ask you a question, may I?
sure.
I think I know the answer within a country or two, but the people watching this podcast may get a kick out of knowing just how many countries you've visited in your lifetime.
So what's your question?
My question is, how many countries have you visited in your lifetime?
142 and still counting. And my sister said, well, the United Nations says there aren't 142 countries. And then I looked at the figures, and basically it's countries and territories. A lot of these islands in the Pacific, Majuro, Kwajalein, et cetera, are not really part of a country. But yeah, we're at 192.
Okay, a follow-up question.
I'm sorry, 142.
A follow-up question, just like they had on the old game shows. Give me, not necessarily in any order, your top 5 favorite countries.
Well, we love New Zealand, specifically the South Island. Everybody says the North Island is where you go, and I wasn't thrilled with that. New Zealand, I love. Australia, I love, but it's huge. You have to take a jet to get from one city to another. Bhutan in the Himalayas, fantastic, like Shangri-La. Hard to get into. I think the daily visa is like $250, but fantastic. Sicily for food. Just recently on Facebook, there's a picture of Milia and Tormelina with Mount Etna in the back. Absolutely incredible. Portofino in Sicily, not worth it. The mafia kind of hangs out there.
But I used to like Portofino cigars.
Yeah. Of course, anywhere in Europe. Tuscany, food. Germany, lived there 14 years, love it. Can't get back, everything's frozen out. But that pretty much takes the top. I mean, there are other weird things, like islands in the Pacific where people don't wear clothes. I don't know. It's been a real experience.
I would think so.
But that brings me up with what I was thinking about when all of a sudden Facebook said, we're posting a picture from the past. And, I started thinking back. In former times, that's the European term for in olden days. In former times, the transistor was invented. My brother had one of the first transistor radios. We had rabbit ears on our TV that got one channel for like 8 hours a day, opened with the national anthem, closed with the national anthem. The rabbit ears didn't work, so people crammed aluminum foil on them and adjust everything, and it was terrible. Polio epidemic. And again, I'm pushing the Smithsonian Channel's thing on Jonas Salk. The fact that he faced the same issues with Sabin that we're facing today. Why the hell we can't learn from the past totally escapes me. But moving on to more fun. Party lines. Pick it up, somebody's talking, you never knew. Phones then were wired to the wall, they had little cords. And then somebody in the 50s said, let's get bigger cords. You can walk through the house dragging your corded phone. So we had that. We had the Sunday drive, which was really neat. I like it because there's a Subaru ad that, or is it that, or is it Nissan Rogue? Nissan Rogue, I think. And it talks about former times when you did your Sunday drive down dirt roads through the country. And then we go visit this couple. And they introduced me to the world. They had the Viewmaster. And it was kind of like looking through a whatever, and you could flip through all these different places in the world. And I went, I want to go there. And it's been worth it. You know, if you don't travel, you know, people go, how can you do this? You know, it's expensive. You know, I'll admit it, a lot of these places. But you know, if you don't travel and then compare it to your culture and their culture and everything else, you really don't have a clue of what's going on in the world. And you're really kind of culturally deprived. An example is the latest Palestinian Israeli thing, whatever you want to call it. I mean,
I call it war.
well, yeah, it's been going on since 1947 when Israel was founded. And, you know, the Palestinians say it's our country. The Jewish people say, well, it's ours. You know, it goes back. And you're fighting over something that's really stupid. But it's understandable. Don't know why, but it is.
It's
So-
interesting. It's interesting in the context of what's happening in the Middle East, which we've had these things our whole lives because we're both the same age. If you look at a map of the Arab world, and then within it you see the tiny, virtually microscopic sliver of land that is Israel, I mean, give me a break. This notion that Israel has taken land from the Palestinians, I just I have a problem with that. And I have a problem with the fact that so many of the Democrats now have a marked bias against the state of Israel and sadly against a lot of Jewish people. Anti-Semitism seems to be rearing its head.
Well, it's particularly sad when you look at the history we lived through. Ship of fools. You know, here you have a ship full of basically Holocaust victims that can't land anywhere. And so they came up with Israel, we'll send them all to Israel. And they've taken a piece of crap land and turned it into a flowering, you know, whatever. And they've taken such a small slice, as you pointed out, that, you know, I don't see what the big deal is. But you got people today that are saying, well, we shouldn't support Israel, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. To which I would ask, okay, smart guy, what's your alternative?
Exactly. Exactly. Hey, I need to, if I can throw it in reverse. Growing up, my mom literally demanded the Sunday drive. I mean, it was her chance with 4 kids to finally get out of the house. She didn't have a car when we were young. So we went for drives in the quote unquote country. And that was always a big deal for her. And you mentioned the party line. I remember my grandparents, who I visited and dearly loved, they had a party line. So, you know, if you got on the phone half the time. I remember going on Main Street at Disneyland in Anaheim, California.
Yeah.
And there was a country store that had the party line. And you could listen in, and it was kind of, well, it wasn't kind of, it was very amusing, but it reminded me of my grandparents' home.
Well, you know, speaking of party lines, God, in those days, when you picked up the phone, they were like totally black, any color you wanted but black. And they didn't even have dials. And I remember, you know, you'd pick up the phone and the operator would come on and you'd say, you know, can I have Randolph 42631. By the way, that was my old phone number. And they'd connect you. And then the dial came in, and God, it changed the whole world. All you do is pick up your phone, you dial, and it was all automatic. Party lines kind of went away. We thought that was neat. Then I was also thinking that as time went on, I always had the newest phone. I had the brick, I had the pager, I had this, I had that. I now have, the iPhone. It's amazing how things have changed.
And you also mentioned transistor radios, and that brought back a memory for me. I saved enough money with odd jobs and went to a store to buy a transistor radio. And back then, as you recall, they could fit in your pocket like your t-shirts where you put your smokes.
Right.
I mean, that's how small they were. And as we both were, we were in high school in the early 60s. And my fondest memory of having that transistor radio was listening to Dodger games. And I heard every one of Sandy Koufax's no-hitters on that transistor radio called by Vin Scully, both of whom are in the Hall of Fame. So that when you mention transistor radio, that's a good memory.
Well, you just triggered another thought. I was big into building rockets. I started out with the Aerobee High, the little 2B thing. And, I finally developed dinosaur gliders and all this other stuff. But when I went back to visit my home 50 years ago, it was 50 years ago when I went. I remember I went on top of the storage area in the neighborhood, and that's where I would launch from. Can you imagine today launching rockets in your backyard?
Well, they're doing it from Palestine.
Well, but God, it was fun. We did rockets. In fact, I did one big rocket after we moved to California. It went up and went down through the roof of our neighbor's car.
Yeah, I had a toy rocket. I can't remember what was used as its fuel. Probably sodium bicarbonate or something innocuous. But the thing would go up a couple 100 feet. It was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun for about a week.
Yeah. Which brings us up to today. As you probably know, I have spent 8 hours a day for the last 2 weeks migrating my old computer. First of all, I bought a new power supply, whatever they are, and it didn't fit. So I was stuck with this new computer like you got, and it's hardwired. You can't just pull and plug and do easy stuff. So I had to rewire. It's an HP, not advertising, but I had to rewire the whole thing, and finally it works. I got 20 years of data back, from the days when I had a CPM computer. You see, I never thought Microsoft would ever go anywhere. So I have a CPM computer in the garage, where you had to load it with those big disks. And I think it had WordStar or something.
But I think,
It's weird because I never had that growing up. God, if I had a computer when I was in college, life would be so easy. And as you know, where we went, you type something, and if there was a mistake, you couldn't use whiteout, you couldn't change it, you had to retype the whole damn thing.
I thought where you were going was talking about the computer at our college that took up a rather large room, and we all learned to do the punch cards, the data cards.
Yeah.
I believe the language was Gotran and Fortran.
Right?
That's how many years ago it was, but
Oh,
it would take 100 shoeboxes full of cards to do the simplest thing.
And if you didn't number the cards as an addition, you dropped them on the floor and everything was gone because they had to be in order.
Right.
I remember everybody was so excited, and I'm going, and you're right, it took up a huge area. It was an IBM something 70. And it was totally weird. But I was talking to my wife and she went, why do you find this weird? Remember Bill Gates said there'd be a computer in every house. Well, now in every house, there's, like 3 computers and you've got Wi-Fi stretched as far as you can go. But when we were growing up, we didn't have any of that.
No.
The world in the last 50 years has changed so much. But I think, and it goes back to the 142 countries question, we haven't learned from the past. We just continue to rerun it. We do the same thing and expect different results, which is stupid because you're going to get the same results if you do the same thing. But also, I think most people haven't really thought about their experience and are trying to apply it to today's issues. It's like what's happening today is totally new. Well, that's BS. It's not totally new.
Well, to your point, we live in an age now, and you and I are in our 70s, where people seem satisfied with reading or sending text messages. The attention span is 15, 20 seconds. If you send a young person an article of some depth and you recommend it with kind of a prelude, I think you ought to read it, because you don't even get a thanks for forwarding or hey grandpa, I'm not into this. You don't get anything. And you can see behind me, I come from an era of reading books. I think most of the population now is oblivious to history. We know that it's either not taught in schools or it's being rewritten by liberal progressives that fit their idea of what the country is or the world is. And I believe that, to have a well-rounded education, and it doesn't all have to be what you're taught in school, it can be self-taught. Lincoln proved that. But I think history is important. Biographies are important. And most of all, what transcends book reading is the ability to read and think critically. And you and I were fortunate. We went to a college that taught that, stressed that, and I really don't think you could succeed there without learning that.
It's interesting because that triggers a couple of thoughts. It's my understanding history isn't taught, so we're going to relive it over and over and over again, and God knows what the hell will happen. Literature is pretty much gone. But I found an interesting article. I love Hillsdale College. And every month, I send me an article. And this month, the article was on, I think, called critical race theory or something. And I never understood it. And they talked about what it came from. The basic bottom line was equity, not equality. But then it rambled on about how, we ought to redistribute land and Marxist this and Marxist that. And I thought, this is what people are pushing now? I mean, under what grounds do they even come up with this BS?
By the way, for our listeners, Hillsdale College is in Michigan. It's a private liberal arts college. And its claim to fame is that it takes no federal money. So it's truly independent. And the federal government cannot leverage it or try to steer its administration, its president, its curriculum. And they offer a lot of free online courses.
Their classes for free.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
You
Yes.
have to go to the school. And I got to tell you, the president of the college is a big Churchill fan and has written some fantastic articles along with Churchill's son to kind of explain that part of the world. I mean, for those who don't have a clue, you know who Reagan is. You know, World War II was not the Revolutionary War.
Well, I have two busts of Winston Churchill in the house. Of course, Obama sent his from the Oval Office back to England when he took over the presidency. And I'm sure you know this, Dick, but the president of Hillsdale was trained at the graduate school where we went to college. We went to a cluster college concept modeled after Cambridge, and it includes a graduate school. So I took the online course from him on Churchill.
I
and
did.
It's fantastic.
Oh, it was incredible because, you know, he wasn't as popular as history. It's one of those cases where you really screw up when you're in charge, and after you die, everybody decides that you're the greatest thing in the world. And Churchill was kind of like that, a very complex man. And as he developed, but now that we've had the time to look back, I mean, he was the man for the time.
Right. And his politics changed. So he was capable of, reviewing where he was at in the context of the times and adjusting. And that's a good object lesson for young people. Embrace change and figure out how, given whatever set of circumstances you find yourself in, you can adapt and prevail, because that is life.
Well, you know, you just triggered a thought in me again, an old memory. For those who don't remember Pope Pius and, you know, all the popes basically up until the current one, let's go to my favorite president, Ronald Reagan. You know, I always thought when he began his second term that he had Alzheimer's. You know, he'd fall asleep at cabinet meetings, you know, eat too many jelly beans and everything else. But now when you look back at what he did, an absolutely incredible man. And yet, don't forget, most of the kids in college today weren't even alive when he was president. They don't have a clue. I could throw at Jimmy Carter. They don't have a clue. I think a lot of people today don't know how we got from where we started, which for us was the late 40s, to where we got to now. They don't have a clue. And because of that, they don't have a framework to analyze what's going on. You know, their only framework is, let's stop, you know, instead of defunding the police, the new thing is, let's defund Israel, let's do this, let's do that, with no understanding of what got us to where we are, what we've tried in the past.
Well, much like my comment about text messages, and this may have started particularly during the Vietnam War protests, but you know, we've very much raised a nation of placard people. You know, if you can get a cliched message on a placard, you're supposed to be a genius. And you know, at the you know, part of the avant-garde and changing the world. And to me, that doesn't do it.
Okay, let me
Go
do
ahead.
another plug, because I know you're a fan of late 40s, early 50s black and white movies. I like the ones that were put out kind of the anti-war thing, where they started off selling war bonds, blah, blah, blah. And then you had the bad Nazi and the good guys, George Raft, good guy. I grew up on that kind of stuff. World War II, Korean War, you know, been there, done that. I think part of the problem today is, again, people don't read history, But number two, they don't, as you pointed out, use critical thinking.
Well, I don't believe they do. By the way, I watched Gilda last night with
You watch what?
Gilda, Glenn Ford, Rita Hayworth.
Oh,
Terrific movie.
well, the old movies were terrific, and I like the black and white World War II war effort type movies. You know, when I was a kid, yeah, you could buy a book of tickets in your school year, and I think they were a nickel a ticket, and you could go and see 2 movies for a nickel. But the movies reflected the time. Movies today don't seem to have any grasp on reality.
Well, within the first 10 minutes of most movies today, you know, there's a sex scene. The F word is repeated at least a dozen times, and somebody gets shot. And the people that make these films are the same people that advocate gun control, abortion.
Oh, and they don't like walls, but they have a 10-foot wall around their house.
Exactly.
I'm
And
such
I
a-
could talk movies. That's we'll have to do a segment where we just talk film. It's my favorite art form, at least from the classic era when it was an art form.
Well, you know, I would agree, but I think my point on today's podcast is people need to go back to history. Don't paint something on a placard and defund this, defund that. Get a clear understanding of how we got to where we are and why what we did in the past won't necessarily work now.
Well, as an example, the French were in Vietnam in the very early 50s. By that, I mean, I think 50, 51. And then eventually, you know, fell at help me with because you were a Vietnam War veteran. Dien Phu, am I pronouncing it correctly?
I think so. You know, I'm not good at that.
And the Eisenhower administration was putting advisors in, and then Kennedy, who ran a tough campaign against Ike, and didn't want to appear to be soft in foreign affairs and soft on communism, upped the number of advisors in Vietnam. The thing that bothered me most about Vietnam was the fact that street mobs dictated our foreign policy. And that never should have been the case. What a lot of people don't know about Vietnam, regardless if you think it's the right or wrong cause.
Well, yeah, but
Let me make this comment. Few people know we really never lost a battle there. We really never lost a battle there. Now, I remember when Walter Cronkite pretty much said that, you know, had a change of heart on Vietnam and said we were losing the war. And I remember from history, Lyndon Johnson telling some of his close advisors that if Walter Cronkite had a change of heart, we've lost. I mean, even back then, the media, along with the street mobs, were influencing policy. The other thing, just as a bit of trivia, and then I'll pass the ball to you, Dick, is I wonder how many people know that the 3-day Battle of Gettysburg had as many casualties as the Vietnam War.
well, I just read a thing on the Battle of Gettysburg, and I learned that, and I was horrified. But now you're talking about the Vietnam War, and that's again where history comes in, because I am a firm believer that the lessons we should have learned from Vietnam would have worked better in Afghanistan, our longest standing war. In other words, we learned nothing from the past, we repeated it again, and we got the same results. And if we pull out, the women will get screwed, no pun intended. But we should have learned.
Well, we could have learned from the Russians who preceded us in Afghanistan, had a lengthy
we
war
should
there.
have learned from the French who preceded us in Vietnam.
Well, that's what I was alluding to. Yeah.
Okay, we're running out of time. I think-
Already?
Oh, yeah, and I think it's really worked out well. Let's run a scene and see how it comes out. Man, we're wired for next year, or next month, or next week. I don't know.